Hey there everybody, Jamie here again from the Flow Genome Project, and today on this Facebook Live we are going to be discussing the neurophysiology or neurosomatics, literally the brain and body components of full spectrum sexuality. So we get a lot of comments, especially in our live workshops. We don't do a lot of advertising and talking about this outside of kind of private or invitational gatherings, but basically everything that applies to altering states of consciousness, creating those moments of ecstasis, which is those moments of non-ordinary awareness where we step outside our waking selves. Sexuality is obviously one of the handiest and dandiest ways to get there. So within a responsible context and coming from the sort of the neuroscience side of things, that's obviously a fun and interesting place for many of us. And for those of you that are just tuning into this for the first time, again, I'm Jamie from the Flow Genome Project. This is actually part 2 of a series which we were just kind of playfully doing on sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the neuroscience behind those kind of hedonic or pleasure-seeking pursuits. So we ran out of time on the first one. If you're interested, go back and check that out. That was fundamentally on the drugs and rock and roll part. And today, as promised, we're coming back around to finishing up with the sexuality. So we got about 30 minutes. We're going to try and keep it tight as far as timing goes, but really just kind of jump right in. So a little framing, just so this doesn't seem completely off the reservation and wildly irresponsible to be talking about. Why would we be sharing this? Well, the simplest reason is that A, we're all sexual creatures, it's how we got here. B, for those of us that are in serial relationships or long-term relationships, or really kind of any kind of relating, we are presumably seeking similar things: love, affection, comfort, security, and ideally the opportunity to kind of, stay together, live a life of, passion, meaning, adventure, etc. And for most of us, it doesn't work out always as according to plan. And for most of us, we experience the drags and the letdowns, the challenges, entirely subjectively, meaning that if the flame flickers and dwindles in my relationship, and this could be over the span of a month, just met you, but already the honeymoon is wearing off, it could be the span of decades. It doesn't really matter, so just kind of, adjust this commentary as to what's relevant for you in your life, and also what you might want in your life if you're not quite there yet. But we tend to experience all of the ups and downs, and especially the downs, highly personally. We don't have an objective point of view on it. And as we've talked about in other lives, the ability, like one of the key moves in accelerating our development, our psychological development, our effectiveness, our impact, is to be able to go from subjectively submersed in something to objectively aware of it. If I don't know that I'm swimming in water, I don't even know what the concept of wetness is, like the proverbial goldfish in the bowl, I am subjectively fused with it. Once that goldfish gets a shot of intelligence, realizes, oh shit, I've been swimming in water all along, I have options, but I don't have legs. Okay, that's a whole level up for Mr. Goldfish. Well, the same thing for us when it comes to assessing and understanding the mechanisms underneath our romantic and sexual relationships. Okay, so in fact, Derhard, nice to see you. Van der Merwe, you must be a South African, and that brings me back to those, half my family's South African, and as a kid we used to have that list of Van der Merwe joke books. So for anybody who doesn't know Van der Merwe, he's kind of the ongoing Afrikaans dunce, and he's basically like back in the day, well before political correctness, so substitute Irish jokes, substitute Polish jokes in Africa, they've got Van der Merwe jokes. So a good blast from the past there, Derhard. Nice to see you wherever you are, whether you're in SA or somewhere in North America. So to get back to the point, the reason we're offering this is because it will give you an understanding of the neurobiology underneath your subjective personal experience. And A, hopefully that gives you a little bit of distance, a little bit of wiggle room so that you don't take it all so personally. And B, also gives you some understandings of what can I do about it that doesn't require hours and hours of couch time, because typically when relationships go on the rocks, there's usually one half of the party that says, I think we really need to go and see someone, honey, right? Therapist, counseling, support, those kind of, or a workshop, those kind of things. And typically the other half of the partnership is less than stoked. Well, ideally, if you find the right therapist, you find the right community to work with, that can be brilliant and life-changing. But that's also talking more about the problems at the level of the talking about the problems. So we're big fans of go above it or go below it rather than into it further. So the idea here will be you'll also learn literally how you can make more love. Not I don't feel the emotion, right? Therefore, I'm going to be pissed at you, and therefore you need to take the trash out more and make the bed or do the dishes. Remember, it's never about the dishes, or I get to have a girls' weekend, or you get to have a guys' weekend. None of that tit for tat bullshit that seems to sort of take the place of reigniting passion, and more like, hey, here's the knobs and levers of our neurochemistry. Here's how we can literally engage that to make more love. Therefore, we've got more to play with and more fun to have. Okay, so all that said, that's the setup. Step one, we're going to talk about 3 different time frames that the neurochemistry of sexuality plays out in. And the first is sort of annual or multi-annual, meaning over the years. The next will be over a month, and the next one, and the last one will be over a day. And hopefully, as you just kind of see those, hopefully there'll be a few light bulbs going off, a few little ahas of recognition as to how that's shown up in your life or not, and then ideally giving you a little bit more of a sense of what you can do about it. For anybody that's interested, we're going to put a link to our Flow for Couples course somewhere in the comments. It should be ideally fairly close up to the top. Normally, we would say start somewhere else as far as like take our Flow profile, that's online as well, or take a Flow Fundamentals course if you're just interested in Flow and neuroscience. If you're really fired up about the subject matter specifically in this Facebook Live, then the Flow for Couples is a fine place to start. So if you are interested, don't worry. There's another place you can go to take a deeper dive, and certainly another one you can go with a partner if you'd like. All that said, step one to notice is evolution is amoral. It doesn't care who we mate with. Right? All the evolutionary impulse is wiring us to do is to procreate with as much genetic diversity as possible. Okay? So that sounds obvious saying it out loud, but it's also really important to notice that that impulse, which is hardwired into all of us, is quite often at odds. In fact, really, the moment we have found a mate, we have paired, and we have had sex once or a handful of times, evolution starts working against us. So the moment it's got us together and horizontal, game over as far as all of our own personal needs and goals. Okay, so and here's some of the reasons why. So fundamentally, we get the strongest dump of neurochemistry, meaning of all the reward hormones and neurochemicals, in the first weeks and months. So dopamine, norepinephrine. Dopamine is cocaine, is the street drug analog. We get a very strong shot of that, of norepinephrine, even endorphins. We get a peak state of arousal and reward. And in some respects, people have classified kind of the head over heels honeymoon phase, or puppy love, whatever you want to call it, as literally a transitory mania. We're literally out of our minds, which is why it's so impossible to, it's the whole Romeo and Juliet thing. It's also why it's so impossible to teach teenagers in the springtime, all those kinds of things. So just know that is nature's full court neurochemical press. It is dumping everything in our systems possible to say, forget your day job, forget your homework, go and pursue this and that person more than anything else, right? And that lasts for between 24 to 36 months. So that's going to be your time period of tear your clothes off passion, can't stop thinking about each other, obsessive thinking, all those kinds of things are a direct product of the neurochemistry. And then, almost basically like clockwork, that is not coincidentally exactly the amount of time you need to mate, conceive, gestate, deliver, and wean an infant. Okay, and that's where evolution and we part ways, because we stand up happily all wearing white in front of our friends and say, till death do we part, fingers crossed, and then evolution says, hey, let's spin the wheel again and get more genetic diversity in there. Okay, so when relationships falter at that stage, there's this neurochemical sort of flatline. You really walk down into some of the long-term bonding hormonal profiles, so serotonin, oxytocin, some of those kind of things where I might feel intimate, I might feel tender and connected to you, but those sparks, that impossible magnetic attraction, I'm missing. And if I didn't know any better, I might say something's shifted between us. And in reality, it's just literally encoded genetic and epigenetic programming getting us through that initial evolutionary impulse to safely conceive and deliver and wean an infant. So for many, many people, right, and then you're basically in the trough. And you're in the trough until you either get used to it, say this is not enough for me, and you break the relationship and go seek novelty, you go back to the top of the slide with someone else, Or, and ideally this would be the third option that we're going to kind of advocate for, regardless of your long-term plans, is take control of your own neurochemistry so you can tune the experience you have with someone you care about. Right. So a couple of things here. So now we've gone off the honeymoon. We're down into that trough, and that trough persists, and that's also where you get to the 7-year itch. That's usually, arguably, I mean, that's a sort of made up folk saying, but that is the time period after which people say, hey, whoa, I'm craving novelty, I'm craving diversity. Now there's two classic versions of this, one for guys and one for girls, that are worth noticing. The first is, as women, be super careful. This is like one of these dirty tricks of unintended consequences of pharmaceuticals, right? But many women who are on the pill for birth control can find a man that they're attracted to, and they've got much more estrogen in their profile, right? Because that's what the pill does, and it sort of suppresses the monthly ovulation cycles. And so their entire pattern recognition for who's the right guy is very maternal. And they will choose a guy who is typically different pheromonal profile. So the guy who will literally smell different than their actual kind of prime mate, who is often lower testosterone, so less square jaws, less kind of facial hair, musculature, these kinds of things. And will choose the guy who would be fundamentally the right guy to look after me and my offspring. So sort of classically the new age wimp. Right? And they will say yes. He will propose to her. She'll say yes. They get a little house in the suburbs. They say, now's the time. Let's start trying to have kids. She goes off the pill. Her entire endocrine profile shifts back to closer to her steady state. She takes a look across the bed. She doesn't like the smell of this dude. She doesn't like the look of this dude. And she wants to go out and bang a biker. She doesn't know why, but that's what's happened. And so, I mean, I'm putting it incredibly kind of crudely and bluntly, but like that is a substantial shift from what a woman is experiencing. Again, thinking this is all subjective. Like, I wake up next to this guy and suddenly I've got utter contempt for him and he seems like a drip. What happened? And this is just as the moment we're conceiving, right? And suddenly I have zero interest in this guy and I've got wandering eyes for someone else. Another one that happens is the classic midlife crisis for a guy, right? He goes off and buys a convertible and wants to, run away with his secretary. Why does that happen? Well, obviously in the early 40s to mid 40s, a man's testosterone count tends to drop off. And so one of the first things, and sex with a new mate and sex with a new younger mate both boost testosterone, as does, potentially driving a car with the top down, right? So he's going to, he's kind of buying his masculinity back. So, practically, tragic and totally destructive, right? But intuitively, as far as what does his system need, he is seeking out and he's seeking to remedy an imbalance in his body-brain system. Now, obviously, the tragedy is he's creating another imbalance on top of an imbalance and possibly an irretrievable one. And when that relationship with the secretary, right, who's a generation younger, they've got nothing socially and culturally and intellectually in common, but they've had that 2-year wham bam passionate thing. When that weans again, he's like, he shakes it off, and as often as not goes, oh my God, what have I done? And then goes back to, earlier spouse says, honey, I'm so sorry, I've missed all those things, right? They were comparing, he's comparing apples to oranges. He's comparing peak sexual arousal, dopamine, norepinephrine, lose your mind, romantic attraction, to trough or long-term plateau, serotonin, oxytocin, trust, intimacy, connection, and belonging. And it's apples to oranges. But when the second relationship comes off that trough and now it's apples to apples, he's like, this one doesn't even count. I have nothing to say to this woman other than chasing her around physically. Right, so two kind of dirty pool tricks that both evolution and our current sort of pharmacological profiles play. One is women getting attracted to the wrong guy while on the pill and then realizing, well, not the wrong guy, a really nice guy quite often, but a guy that she doesn't have that primal, passionate connection to, getting off the pill to actually start a family and realizing this guy leaves me cold. And the other is the classic sort of midlife crisis for the guy running off with the younger girl. And of course, now if the guy knew these things, he'd go to his doctor, get some testosterone gel or cream, replacement therapies, etc., could address it in a much more nuanced and precise way without nearly the carnage that often sadly happens in those cases. And then another random one, this doesn't really fit within the arc of the argument, but another random one is that women's ovulation there's another like just trick of evolution, is that if a woman is deeply aroused and has an orgasm with a new mate, she has a higher likelihood of conception than with her existing mate, and it can even swing her ovulation cycle plus or minus by 2 to 3 days. So that whole classic sort of breakup and makeup sex and all those things where women get pregnant at curious times. You're like, how is that even possible? I was sleeping with this guy for years and nothing happened. Had one night stand that was passionate, etc. And now suddenly I have a baby daddy. Those kind of things are also evolution, kind of just basically playing a different game than we are. So if we know these things, it may not change the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. It may not change kind of the passions and the sort of momentary stupidity that love can lay on us, but at least we have some awareness of what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, so that's the multi-year arc. That's kind of what we're all looking at. And again, we said once you're off that initial high, no, it's not you. This is like raising children. The terrible twos are called terrible twos for a reason. It's the development of egoic identity. Adolescence and punk-ass teenagers, right, is another known developmental stage. All these things come online. If you didn't know it, you take it all so personally. Why does my baby not like me anymore? Or why does my teenager suddenly want to be out of the house no matter what? We would take it all completely personally. Most of us at least have passing familiarity with developmental stages of children, so when these things come along, us and all of our friends and family go, oh, tut, 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 you're just in that stage. Well, the same is true for our relationships as well. So that said, now let's go down from the annual time frame to monthly and daily. And we'll take monthly to start with. So fundamentally, this is not men are from Mars, women are from Venus. This is just women are lunar and men are solar, in the sense that women follow not surprised to 50% of the world, but women follow a 28-day lunar cycle as far as their menstruation. Guys typically follow a more specific and shorter 24-hour cycle as far as their hormonal fluctuation. It's not the only things that either of us do, but that's just a way for us to think about it and talk about it. So again, if anybody's interested, if any women in particular, but I think this is also super useful for men, there's a great book by a colleague of ours coming out of Johns Hopkins called The Woman Code. It's a purple book, if you're looking, and it's got a really interesting take, which is basically saying that most of women's sort of OB-GYN complaints, and that's everything from cramping to irregular periods to cysts to like you name it, like pretty much the entire kitchen sink of women's health issues are exacerbated or flat out caused by irregularities in hormonal profiles. And so the first advocacy in that book is for women to be like, do you know and are you connected to your natural equilibrium as far as your monthly hormonal cycles? And obviously, all the things we do, from the foods we're eating to the plastics we're engaging in, and once again, public enemy number one, the birth control pill, completely knocks women out of that. And in fact, I just saw a study this morning that said there's an 80% higher likelihood of teenage depression, 80% higher for teenage girls who are on the pill than are not. And that number drops to like 35% and then 25% as women age, so as they get into their 20s and 30s. But that's pretty pronounced when you think of, again, just knocking out your hormonal equilibrium. So what does it look like? So let's just say, hey, this is just public service announcement, consult with your doctor, consult with, your healthcare professionals for your second, third, fourth opinions. But we would certainly advocate that if you have the possibility of getting to non-hormonal birth control in your life, and whether that's IUDs or whatever else it would be that are reliable and safe and good alternates, seriously consider it. If nothing else, read the book, The Woman Code, and make your own decision. But that is one that can get you back to a natural equilibrium in your hormonal cycle. So what does that hormonal cycle look like? For many women, apologies in advance if this is completely old hat. For dudes, listen up, because this might actually inform a world that's been completely opaque to you. So women have a 28-day cycle, and it peaks and troughs as far as which hormones are in their system at which times, and that directly informs their arousal, their attention, their amorousness, and a whole host of things. So for a dude, if you've ever felt like, hey man, I was on fire, I'm like, Rico Suave, I can't miss, I rocked my lady's world last weekend, and then this weekend you're trying exactly the same moves and exactly the same sequence, and you're getting nothing, or she's irritated, or just pissed off, or just rolls over and says she'd rather go to sleep, and you think it's all about you. Well, it could be, but it might also be about what's happening in her cycle. So obviously there's the week of menses, right? And then, excuse me, following that, the week after that, a woman is going to, and this is obviously not true for all women in all instances, this is a broad average of women's behaviors and patterns, sample size of 1, right? And if you have things in your life that are knocking out your natural equilibrium, know this is at least a model, kind of a clinical model of what you might get somewhere back near to. Okay, so the week after menses is a period of peak testosterone for women, as well as other kind of sex hormones and neurochemicals. That is her time of maximum arousal, shortest requirement of foreplay, basically ease of orgasm, and openness to kind of rough and ready, passionate sex. Okay, that then tapers. So you've got kind of a 7 to 10 day window that tapers, and it troughs the week before menses. So that is going to be a time where sex could be uninteresting altogether, or if interesting, because there's relationship and there's the time and the place and all those kind of things, is going to be best done with extended foreplay, very gentle, very connected, and predominantly more relational than primal. Okay, so guys know this, women know this. Okay, and we'll come back to this in a moment, but know where your peak times are, and if you're going to plan romantic getaways, if you're going to plan babysitters and time away, all those kind of things, you might as well stack it with your woman partner's peak times and cycles. Make it fun, make it easy. And that's a simple example of making more love, right? We have those experiences. They are deeply connecting. They are renewing and affirming. They're putting money in the relational bank account, which we know, right? Making a life together, raising a family together, having 2 jobs, even having just pets and animals, whatever it is, like that stuff's all hard, right? It's all hard and thankless. And the good news is we get really good at it. We're really good householders together. We're really good life partners together, but the passion's been squelched out, right? We owe it to ourselves to be able to replenish the bank account. Okay, and this is simply one way to just make it easier on yourself. So we've done the annual long-term. We've also just talked about the monthly. Now let's bring it down to the daily, fundamentally the daily, the 24-hour cycle. And this is where guys come in, because guys have peak testosterone but low estrogen in the morning. So the whole classic, whatever, guys talking about waking up with an erection, whether they call it a pup tent or a kickstand or a morning wood, whatever, all the kind of local, like jokes about it. Some of it is just guys need to pee in the morning, they go to full bladder, and that's a way not to wet the bed. Awesome, guys. But then there's also just literally it's peak testosterone, peak cortisol, and that is a time when a guy is ready for fundamentally, relatively impersonal physical sex. For a woman partner, if that's her bag, that time of her cycle, in general, she likes that, awesome, go for it. But some women can also say, dude, I felt like I wasn't being met, I wasn't being seen, this just felt a little, just not always into it. So if that's the case, basically a man's testosterone starts here in the morning when he wakes up, testosterone and cortisol, and it drops through the morning, and then there is a second wave in mid-afternoon. And the mid-afternoon also balances estrogen and some others of the sort of more relational and connected neurochemistry. So that is your best, literally no pun intended, but best bang for your buck if you want both relational connection plus physical passion. And that's why, back in the day, I think it was in the 70s, skyrockets in flight, afternoon delight, right? That whole sort of ode to daytime loving. Right? But this is where it gets interesting, which is that right around 8 o'clock at night, so you've got the initial one in the morning, drops through the late morning and then into the early afternoon. It peaks again mid-afternoon, and then basically it's a slow, steady decline till 8 p.m., at which point testosterone and all other sex hormones just nosedive. So what does that look like for most of us, right? Most of us report having sex after 10 o'clock at night, and they report literally the reasons why. It's not, I feel super fired up and passionate at these times. It's literally proximity to an available mate, meaning we're in our pajamas or naked, lying in bed next to each other, and a lack of other responsibilities, meaning the kids are in bed or work is done, I've shut my laptop, blah, blah, blah. So it's a really lame default time, and it is completely at odds with our hormonal profiles. It is literally the time we are least up for it, least passionate, least physically aroused, and least emotionally connected. To say nothing of just physically exhausted and fried from our hectic days, right? So if you measure, so now let's put them all together. Let's stack these, right? You've got your annual arc, and let's just assume you're past your initial super hot honeymoon phase. And that could be just, you can take it in kind of accordion style. It could just be the first few months, or it could be the first 2 to 3 years, wherever you are in that arc in your relationship. And you're already experiencing the downtick in the mad passion hormones, the norepinephrine, endorphins, dopamine. Okay? Then you're in that trough, and then you take another step down and you're into evenings in an unaware cycle of your woman's arousal, right? This is all heteronormative, so just adjust accordingly for your own lived experience. So you may be hitting, you may be missing on that, but for certain you're missing on the man's arousal cycle post 8 p.m. And of course, how much sexuality also, just culturally, tends to include a glass of wine, a few beers, basically alcohol, to unwind, relax, get in the mood. Well, alcohol is actually one of the worst aphrodisiacs. It basically creates dehydration for the woman, decreased lubrication, decreased passion, and as Dr. Ruth famously said back in the day, every drink past 2 hangs off the end of a man's penis. So, whiskey dick is the kind of crude term for that, but you're like that on top of fatigue, on top of low testosterone, on top of a multi-year drop in our hormones and attractiveness, on top of rolling the dice on whether we've got the right week in the woman's cycle. And you can see, and then we're in therapy because we've just lost that spark. And it's like, you might not have at all. You're just literally stacking the deck as far against yourselves as you possibly could, and then taking it personally. And then saying, well, you're really starting to irritate me, or I don't know, there's just more interesting things out there. So we because when we're subjectively fused in that experience, we don't know what else to make about it. And so we're storytelling machines. So we'll tell ourselves stories as to why all these things mean that I just don't love you anymore, or that we've lost that loving feeling, or whatever it is. In reality, you could have a really good partner, and you could be really quite well matched for each other, and you could be doing a bang-up job of making a life together. Right, and pursuing careers, and holding a house and raising kids and doing whatever you've chosen to do together, or traveling the world and adventuring. It doesn't really matter. But you could be with the right person, just experiencing your attempts to rekindle and attempts to renew and affirm via your sexual relationship, just at the worst possible times. So turn it around and say, okay, what would it be like to figure out the woman partner's peak times? Time that with time away from home and hearth. Ideally, go get a 5-star hotel together within that week of maximum sexy time. Don't wait until 11 o'clock at night, right? And just try those, and then time your encounters with each other for times that rising tide is lifting all boats. So that is that's just the baby steps. This is just kind of high-level overview to some of the biggest arcs. We go into much more detail about what you actually do once you're together, and how you can basically harness playing each other's nervous systems. I mean, the idea is like we're prefrontal cortexes connected to spinal columns and erogenous zones. And once you start thinking of our self systems like that, and you're in the context of a trusting relationship, and it doesn't matter the length of duration, just trusting, and we're in this together, you can really tune and play each other's neurochemistry in stunningly good ways. So hopefully that's an initial good start. I just want to kind of be able to answer some questions, because folks have been asking some great ones. Alex, you just asked, I'm wondering if you know about the levels of testosterone right after ejaculation. Is it true there's a sudden spike? That's a great question. My understanding is there's prolactin and some other things that dip. Bottom line is that dudes want to go to sleep right after ejaculation. If you go to the Taoist side of things, Their whole thing is conservation, like ideally that seeds of any form, including our own, are very nutrient-rich and dense, mineral-rich and dense, and you want to preserve and conserve those. There's some varying rules of thumbs about basically decreasing frequency of ejaculation. I think by the time you're in your 30s and 40s, it should be not much more than a week, and then it kind of decreases over there. Play with that. There are alternate, more contemporary schools of thought that say, like just circulate life and see what happens. You don't need to kind of conserve. But certainly, I would say that frequent sexual activity in general, rather than just right after the event, is going to boost and increase testosterone and just fundamentally vital profiles. Because what are you signaling, right? You're signaling to your body, I am alive and thriving. And the same with women. They've done interesting studies where 3 orgasms a week for women is the equivalent of 10 years off their age, perceived age. So they'll do photographs, and have blind panels judge how old they think a woman is, etc. And so 3 orgasms a week for skin tone, for estrogen, for all these kind of things, you're basically signaling your body, I'm still in the game, right? So frequency of sexuality is a great health benefit, physiological stress reducer, etc., nervous system reset, etc. Okay? Sheena has just asked, how do daily peaks change when a guy works shift work? My husband gets 2 hours of sleep at night and then another 4 hours between 12 and 4. Whew, Sheena. Okay, so great question. Short answer is I don't know, but I can predict the direction it's likely to go, because what we do know about shift work is it significantly whacks out your circadian rhythms, meaning your natural biological clock, and it has pretty intense side effects. So a book that I'd highly recommend for you and your husband is to check out The Power of When. Literally like clock time when. It's just come out. It's by a friend and colleague of ours, Dr. Mike Bruce. He's a sleep expert. He's been on Dr. Oz 30 or 40 times. Not that that's a big, feather in his cap, other than it's popular and you can know where to get him. But he does quite a bit of really detailed work in that book on finding out what your chronotype is, meaning where are you naturally, the owl and lark kind of idea, but subsegments that in much more detail and gives some good feedback. So I would propose, Sheena, if you're interested in this, what we do know in our work with the Navy and some of those SEAL teams, their physician did tests with those guys, and when they're doing shift work, meaning night operations for 6 months or more in Afghanistan, their testosterone levels dropped to that of a 12 to 13-year-old girl. So if your husband has been struggling in any way, know he is up against a really hard challenge, which is he's flipping his biological clock, his circadian rhythm on its head. It does have absolutely substantial health impact and hormonal impacts. There are ways with natural light, with artificial UV light, with skillful melatonin, with skillful other things for you guys to begin getting a handle on that. But take it seriously. It's a real deal. And if that's what he needs to do to provide, and or that's just simply what his career is made of, like the Navy guys, that's what they signed up for. Hats off to him. And no, it's not just I'll get used to it and kind of heroically soldiering through it. Like, definitely make the time and the place to care for and support him in whatever ways you can. All right. Alex, what would the difference between estrogen and progesterone? I don't know is the simple answer, but I would say look into that Woman Code book for deeper answers on that. That's an area I have not gone super deeply into. We're just kind of that's on our list of cool things to check out next. But certainly, the other thing, the opposite of estrogen in men, and obviously, you guys have probably heard the studies on BPA plastics and increasing estrogen count in men and creating sort of, like man boobs and those various things. Certainly there is a lot of excess estrogen, both in our drinking water and in our just chemical exposures. So men are getting more than they need. And then also women actually need testosterone. It's the driving sex hormone for women as well. And in fact, a colleague of ours who's doctor at Harvard, and he was the former chair of, I think, the American Society of Sexuality and Reproductive Health. He kind of splits his time between Harvard and Aspen in Colorado. He prescribes for basically perimenopausal women and postmenopausal women estrogen therapy, but for their sexual satisfaction will actually off-label prescribe half doses of Viagra and topical testosterone cream. So that's just an example of, like, men are probably getting too much estrogen these days, and it's not a great thing for them. Women are often not getting enough testosterone, and that can also change the balance for them. Geo, With a man, okay, question, with a man over 40, would testosterone hormone treatment be beneficial? Well, let's see how we do this. Short answer, possibly. Absolutely, possibly. I actually have a friend who's been engaging that. I think he started about 45, and he said it's the single most game-changing thing he's done. And he's yoked these days. He's been doing CrossFit, and he's like super, just thriving, filled with life, passion, lack of brain fog, all those kind of things. There are provisional and potential downsides, so the key is partner with a clued-in physician and don't go, this is just our advocacy, but I'd say don't go with the, hormone replacement therapy clinic in the book that's got, not even nurse practitioners doing it and they're doling the stuff out. It's serious. It has massive effects. It can create, in the wrong amounts and dosages, it can create follow-on systemic imbalances. So pay attention to it, but potentially, if your T count is low and there's a safe and clean way to get bioidentical replacement hormones in your system, it could be utterly game-changing. So by all means, look at it. And then, of course, Tim Ferriss has done a lot of stuff on this, if anybody's interested in his 4-hour workouts and 4-hour work week kind of stuff. And he, I think, quite sanely came back to, well, anytime you're taking something that's artificial exogenous, meaning it's synthesized and I then ingest it or inject it or do whatever I do with it, that is far less good, balanced, and sustainable for me than if I do things to promote it myself. So lifting strong weights, intensive physical activity, ice baths and cold showers, there's 100, and even sexuality itself, right? All those things can naturally raise my T count levels in me, and then it's my own body making it for myself, which we know is perfect. So if there's a chance, I would say exhaust all possibilities to boost this naturally versus going for the quick outside fix. And then if you still need the additional nudge, absolutely explore that with a qualified doctor. Cool. Thank you. Carmen, is the ecstasy of an orgasm considered flow state? If or if not, how does it affect getting into flow state? Okay, so great question. One of our friends, Nicole Didone, she has started an organization called One Taste, which is all about women's orgasmic meditation. She has been hounding us on this for years and is convinced for herself that flow states and the kind of zen or altered state of a post-orgasm are the same. I think what we can say is they share similar neurochemical profiles. You can also say, in fact, what's his bucket? His name is Anjan Chatterjee, and if I remember correctly, he is at Penn. He's a neuroscientist there. He has a good book, I think it's called The Aesthetic Brain, and he talks about the little death, la petite mort, which is the French term for basically the moment of egolessness, right? The moment of selflessness that can accompany an orgasm, and how it can be a transcendent experience that is also a shift in our neurochemical profiles. So, if you went to nerdy flow researchers and you asked them this, they would probably give you 17 reasons why they're absolutely impossibly different and couldn't, and utterly, and here's our checklist and blah, blah, blah. If you just kind of take a look at it yourself, you're like, hey, are these all experiences of selflessness? Are these experiences of ecstasis, moving beyond our waking selves? Yes. And can skillfully use sexuality prompt non-ordinary states of awareness? Well, the short answer is hell yes, right? I mean, not only did the French have a name for it, in fact, the Aleister Crowley, the sort of notorious Western sex magician, coined the term erotocomatose lucidity, which was basically a way, and if anybody has seen Eyes Wide Shut, that Nicole Kidman, Tom Cruise, Stanley Kubrick film, that crazy, mask ceremony that they all engage in was a pretty lame, if you ask me, rendition of that Western sex magic rite, which was to string someone out and leave them sexually stimulated for so long that they get exhausted, but they're still stimulated, and the neurochemistry shifts, and they basically are sort of awake, but in a decidedly altered state. And then if you take Hindu, Tantric, or Tibetan Tantric traditions, those guys are obviously all about using sexuality, sometimes cannabis in the form of bhang, which was BHANG, which was kind of like a cannabis-infused goat milk or yak milk or whatever, and they would basically get high as coons on each other and learn to levitate. So there's plenty in the historical traditions, mythological and technological. There's certainly quite a bit in the contemporary neuroscience realm as well. That, yes, again, back to neocortexes, spinal columns, erogenous zones. We pretty much have the keys to the kingdom at this point. So the question is, and I'll leave you guys with this, which is, what do we do with all this? right? Because sex, drugs, rock and roll, to kind of bring it back to part one of this series as well, are all very powerful. They're arguably among the fastest, most potent techniques of ecstasy that get us to non-ordinary states of consciousness, right? So once we realize that they all share remarkably similar neurophysiology, meaning what's happening in our bodies and brains, step one is, hey, becomes really easy to optimize these states and to get very high, very quickly, very precisely, okay? Awesome. But the question is, in service of what? Because if we haven't clarified our intention and our relationship to these acts, they become, in a heartbeat, compulsions, addictions, diversions, and perversions. Okay? Because we are deliberately now tweaking the strongest knobs and levers we've got that are evolutionary encoded to reinforce these behaviors, and these behaviors used to be pretty rare and pretty hard to get. And I mentioned this in last week's Facebook Live when we were talking about drugs and rock and roll, but there's a book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, which is talking about basically those three sensations and how the food industry has hacked our bliss point, right? Literally, they call it the bliss point, and they say basically salt, sugar was super rare. It's honeycombs and ripe fruit. So without the age of refrigeration and global transport networks, that's 2 weeks a year, right? Just go ape shit when you find something sweet. The same with salt, essential mineral, and if we don't have it, we die, right? That's why the Roman centurions were worth their salt, paid in salt, right? And fat's obviously incredibly rare, calorically rich, guts yourself stupid until you couldn't get enough. Now we've got Chili's and TGI Fridays and Krispy Kreme bacon cheeseburgers, right? So we've combined all these things and we are obese and literally eating ourselves to death because we can't stop, right, what is millions of years of encoding to go and get as much as you can of this stuff no matter what, because it was rare and scarce. Now, throw this into the sexuality category. Ron Siegel, UCLA, has arguably said that the desire to get in, it was actually sexuality is obviously the most prime mover, other than can I stay alive long enough to do it? It's the most primary encoded evolutionary impulse. So you've got salt, sugar, fat, sex, and then Ron Siegel at UCLA also says fourth evolutionary drive, right, is to get intoxicated or to change our states. So this is an elaborate way of saying make haste slowly. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. And once we know how to, after the, oh my God, I can't believe we figured it out, right? Once we know how to, when we wrap our heads around that reality, then the question is in service of what? And ideally, we do know, right? We do know that these moments of ecstasis, these moments of stepping out of ourselves, derived from any of these mechanisms, can be profoundly healing for people with trauma. Profoundly, right? And that's a lot of the stuff we're talking about in our next book, Stealing Fire. It comes out in February. Not going to bother with that now, but just tons of studies, blue chip universities, all that kind of stuff. So it can heal trauma, can increase learning, can increase innovation and cooperation and collaboration. In short, right? So it can bring people from broken or wounded to whole, and it can bring people from whole to exceptional. Okay. So then the question is what's our relationship with this stuff? Because if we do just do it out of compulsion or addiction, if we just go back to ring that bell from our sort of lizard brains, right, we've missed the point. And so you can either regress, and you can just be like the rat hitting the lever with any of these techniques, or you can progress. So the real question is, how do we get out of our prefrontal cortex, right? That's our inner critic, right? That's the place we can't get away from. That's the sort of contemporary existential angst man. And so we're highly motivated to get that guy to shut the fuck up just for moments. And we'll do almost anything, right, to see if we can. And the question is do we regress down into lizard brain? I'm just going to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And right, John Lilly back in the 50s created these pleasure probes to go in the skulls of rhesus monkeys. I mentioned this the last time. And what did those monkeys do? They pressed that fucking orgasm button for 16 hours a day, passed out, slept for 8, got right back up and kept pressing the button. Right, so let's not be the rhesus monkeys, right? So the question is what do we do it in service of? And we began that at the beginning of this conversation, which is if you're in a long-term relationship and you've got skin in this game, you've got things you're building and growing that matter in your life and in your love together, then use this in service of that, right? Use this in service of mending what's broken. Use this in service of just like replenishing the well, right? For your art, for your creativity, for your careers, for your children, for each other, right? Use it to heal and then use it to go do awesome stuff. And it's tricky. It's a slippery slope, for sure. And first thing is, can we even do this? Then you do it, and you're like, oh shit, we can, and it works, and oh my God, where's the brakes? So the question at some point becomes not us sitting in a couples therapy going, gee, we've lost that loving feeling and we'd really like to like get that spark back, to like, holy shit, how do we not burn the house down? Right? So invite and encourage you guys, for those that are interested, and this seems, remotely relevant and up for you in your life, just consider that. Conduct your own experiment. Come to your own truths and insights, and then make hay slowly. This stuff is absolutely real. It is in the past. It's been mythologized and kept really under wraps, right? I mean, you had to be in some esoteric tradition. You had to go through 1,000 different gates. I mean, if you think Scientology is bad, right? As far as like, oh, and there's one more door and it's another 100K, right? Think back to any of these esoteric traditions. They were only sharing this knowledge with a handful of people a generation. And now you can go on Amazon, right, and knock yourself out. So the question is then, what are we going to use? What are we going to use it for? And how do we make the most of it once we do? But ideally, this is an open source movement, and this is to say, hey, this is all for us to make the most of our lives. We don't need to settle for broken. We definitely don't need to settle for good enough. And we definitely don't need to settle for like duty bound or obligations as the reason to stay in relationships. That's shitty, I think. And whenever people sort of advance that, like, yeah, this is as good as it gets, hey, this is just kind of life on the other side. This is what maturity looks like, or growing up, or, you just got to abandon your dreams or your passions. No, we don't. No, we don't. In fact, you become skillful partners with each other that can go further than ever. And ultimately the beauty, and I'll leave on this one, this is a subset, this is kind of back to the relational component, but the ultimate beauty is, this stuff isn't easy. It actually takes skill and practice, but it's obviously couldn't be more fun to learn. But once you get good at it with a partner, it's like Lennon and McCartney. I mean, you're like, we make better music together. I mean, yes, we can go off and have our solo bands, or we can go and play with other people, but there is a certain something about how far we get together. And then it becomes sort of the most intimate but impersonal relationship possible, which is no longer about, do you complete me? Do you fulfill my needs? It's, where do we get together? Into the numinous, into the transcendent. And if that's something you can do with a partner, it's rare and precious. And then suddenly there's a new reason to love and defend and protect and invest in that relationship for the long term. Because once we get to the timeless, there's no place else we need to be. So with that, guys, thank you so much for your comments. It's been fantastic checking in with you guys. Really look forward to staying in touch with the comments thread. If you like this, you want to share it, any of those things are always welcome. And anybody that's interested, feel free to jump on our site. There's flowgenomeproject.com, and there's a whole section on just like free tools, videos, etc. There's a profile you can take called the Flow Profile. And there's also a course that literally has come out of my experience for goodness knows how long, 25 years, with my partner Julie, and trying to share the baby step beginnings of this with folks that are interested. It's called Flow for Couples. So again, thank you for all of that. Vanessa, one last thing. This is phenomenally interesting and helpful. Everybody should know this. Oh, everybody would have our, yeah. Absolutely. Let's make love in the literal, most practical, common sense way, and then share it in our work, in our art, in our relationships, in our life. So that's it, folks. Be well, and see you guys next time.